In the quiet hills of Sicily, in a little town called Calatafimi, a boy named Manuel Fodra was born on June 21, 2001. His family was simple, joyful, and full of life. He grew up surrounded by laughter, the warmth of his parents, and the peace of an ordinary Catholic upbringing. To those who knew him, Manuel seemed like any other child, full of energy, eager to play, and curious about the world. But hidden within this ordinary beginning was a destiny that would unfold in a way no one could have imagined. By the summer of 2005, Manuel had just turned 4 years old. His life should have been filled with toys, games, and schoolyard adventures. Instead, it was interrupted by a pain so sharp and unrelenting that it brought tears to his young face. His family rushed him to Palermo, where doctors delivered news no parent is ever prepared to hear. Manuel had a severe form of cancer. In that moment, his childhood took on the shape of a way of the cross, a journey marked by suffering, sacrifice, and yet, astonishingly, joy. For the next 5 years, every hospital visit, every surgery, and every round of chemotherapy would test not just his fragile body, but also the hearts of those who loved him. At first, Manuel reacted like any child might. He longed to go to school, to see his friends, to play soccer in the dusty Sicilian streets. He would cry when treatments kept him away from the life he wanted to live. But slowly, something extraordinary began to happen. A transformation took place inside him, one that could not be explained by medicine or psychology. The pain and fear that might have broken another child instead awakened in Manuel a quiet strength. A Franciscan nun who cared for him, Sister Prisca, was the first to notice. She recalled that before every treatment, Manuel insisted on visiting the chapel. Why? Because there, in the silence of the hospital's small tabernacle, he felt close to Jesus. For Manuel, this wasn't a ritual or a distraction. It was friendship. He wanted to see Jesus, to sit with him, and to speak to him as though he were right there in the room. And little by little, Manuel's suffering was no longer something he endured alone. It became a place where Christ himself drew near. His family saw it too. This little boy, no older than 4 or 5, began to carry himself with a peace that didn't match his age. In his darkest moments, he would ask his parents and the people around him to pray the rosary. "The Hail Marys make me feel better," he would say. And somehow, mysteriously, they did. When pain made him tremble, the prayer gave him comfort. When fear crept in, it gave him strength. This was just the beginning of Manuel's story. A story that would reveal how even the weakest among us, an innocent child with a fragile body, could become a vessel of incredible light, simply because he opened his heart to Jesus and Mary. As Manuel's illness deepened, something remarkable blossomed in his little heart, a tender love for the Virgin Mary. For him, she wasn't distant or unreachable. She was a mother who stayed close in the hospital corridors, a gentle presence who comforted him in the silence of the night. Whenever the pain became unbearable, Manuel would ask his family, "Pray the rosary with me." To him, every Hail Mary was like medicine, soothing his body and lifting his spirit. He believed, with the simplicity only a child can carry, that Mary herself came to sit beside him when the beads of the rosary slipped through his fingers. One day, after hours of exhausting treatment, Manuel turned to his mother with a request. "Let's pray together, because it makes the pain go away." His family began to notice that it wasn't just distraction. The prayers filled the room with a kind of peace so real, so tangible, that even the doctors and nurses felt it. But the bond between Manuel and Our Lady grew even deeper during one unforgettable summer evening. It was the feast day of the village's patron saint, and a procession was held in honor of the Virgin Mary. Manuel, worn down from countless therapies, looked up at his mother and said something astonishing. "Our Lady told me I am her joy, and she will give me fireworks tonight." His mother tried to calm him. There weren't supposed to be any fireworks that evening. The family had heard nothing of it. Surely, it was just the imagination of a sick child longing for a bit of celebration. But Manuel was certain. He lay down to rest, still smiling, and after a while, he was awoken by a sound that echoed through the streets. Bursts of color lit up the Sicilian sky. Fireworks, exactly as Our Lady had promised him. Manuel's eyes lit up with joy. He turned to his mother and whispered with a playful certainty, "Now do you believe me? She told me I am her joy. These fireworks are for me." It was a moment that his family never forgot. Not because of the fireworks themselves, but because of what they revealed. To Manuel, Mary was not an idea, not a statue, not even a story from the Bible. She was alive. She was a mother who listened, who spoke, and who kept her promises even to the littlest of her children. From that night on, Manuel's relationship with Our Lady only grew stronger. He spoke of her with the same natural affection that most children reserved for their earthly mothers. She became the face of comfort in his fear, the presence of joy in his suffering, and the companion who never abandoned him. And through this child's faith, Mary revealed something powerful, that she never forgets the ones who cling to her in trust. By the time Manuel was 6 years old, his faith had already taken on a depth that astonished those around him. Despite the weakness of his body, he carried within himself a burning desire. He longed to receive Jesus in the Eucharist. At first, the chaplain at the hospital would bring Holy Communion only to his mother. Manuel would watch, his eyes filled with longing, and begged to receive Jesus too. But the adults always gave the same reply: "You are too young." Most children his age were just beginning to learn their prayers, too restless to sit through Mass. Yet Manuel was different. His illness, his suffering, and his friendship with Jesus had given him a spiritual maturity far beyond his years. His insistence was not a whim, but a true hunger of the soul. Finally, after much pleading, permission was sought from the Bishop of Trapani. The bishop saw the depth of Manuel's faith and, moved by his condition, gave his approval. On October 13, 2007, Manuel was granted the grace to receive his first Holy Communion. But on the morning of that long-awaited day, disaster struck. Manuel woke up screaming from terrible pain in his leg. He could not stand, let alone walk to the chapel. He feared the dream he had waited for would slip away. His mother tried to comfort him, but nothing seemed to help. Hours passed, and the boy's eyes filled with tears. Then, around noon, something remarkable happened. The pain that had gripped his little body suddenly vanished. Manuel turned to his mother with radiant certainty. "Our Lady has healed me." And so, against all odds, he dressed for the great moment and walked to the chapel. There, in the presence of his family, priests and nuns, Manuel finally received the Eucharist, the living Christ, into his heart. From that moment on, his words carried a wisdom that touched even the most hardened adults. To his friends and to the priests who visited, he explained why he had wanted to receive communion so early. "Because I want Jesus to live in my heart." But he didn't stop there. Manuel also shared a message that he said came from Jesus himself. Tell the faithful to spend at least 5 minutes in silence after receiving communion, so they can speak to Jesus in their hearts without distraction. It was a lesson from the lips of a child, reminding the Church of something so simple, yet so often forgotten. The Eucharist is not just received with the lips, but with the heart. It is a meeting, a conversation, a moment of love. In the weeks that followed, Manuel's devotion deepened. After communion one day, he asked Jesus what he could offer him for Christmas. The answer he received would shape his life. Always show my joy to others. Be a warrior of light in the midst of darkness. And when people asked how Jesus spoke to him, Manuel gave the most disarming reply. He spoke to me in my heart. By 2008, Manuel had been carrying his cross for nearly 3 years. His body was often frail, drained by treatments and exhaustion, yet his spirit seemed only to grow stronger. He radiated a kind of joy that could not be explained, and those who met him often left feeling uplifted, as though they had touched something of heaven. That summer, Manuel's parents and friends arranged a pilgrimage to Lourdes, France, the shrine where Our Lady had appeared to Saint Bernadette more than 150 years earlier. Manuel's heart leapt with excitement. For him, Lourdes was not just a place of healing waters, but a place where heaven touched earth. One evening after dinner at the hotel, Manuel gathered with a small group of pilgrims to pray the rosary. As the prayers filled the air, he quietly said he wanted to dedicate one of the decades for blind children. The others looked at him, puzzled. No one knew why Manuel had chosen that particular intention. But when the group returned from Lourdes, they learned something astonishing. In another group of pilgrims traveling at the same time, a blind child had suddenly regained sight. For those who knew Manuel, this was no coincidence. It was a sign that the prayers of a suffering child were heard in heaven in a special way. Manuel's own faith only deepened after Lourdes. Later that summer, in August of 2008, he received the sacrament of confirmation. He called it the moment when Jesus poured out upon him the gift of his Spirit in abundance. For Manuel, this wasn't just a symbolic step of Christian maturity, it was a real empowerment. He began calling the Eucharist the balm of grace. It was his childlike way of explaining the explosive power of Holy Communion. For him, every time he received Jesus, it was like a spiritual detonation, filling him with strength, joy, and courage, even when his body was wasting away, and those around him could see it. Manuel's illness should have left him constantly crushed, bitter, or withdrawn. Instead, he laughed, prayed, and encouraged others. He transformed hospital rooms into chapels of peace. Friends, priests, and nurses all remarked on the light that shone through him. On July 2, 2009, Manuel was scheduled for a painful medical scan. That day, the cross weighed heavily on him. He didn't want to speak to anyone or even answer the phone. In his heart, he whispered to the Blessed Virgin, "Show me a sign that you love me, that you are with me." That night, just before midnight, Manuel was startled by a familiar sound: fireworks outside. He smiled, remembering the night years earlier when Our Lady had called him her joy and sent fireworks as a gift. Once again, she had answered him. Around this same time, after receiving communion one day, Manuel felt Jesus speak to him again. "Manuel, your heart is not your own. It's mine. I live in you." The words puzzled him, so he asked his spiritual director what they meant. The priest pointed him to the words of St. Paul. "It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me." Manuel accepted the explanation with humility, and soon after, he shared with his friends what he believed was his mission. "Jesus gave me suffering because he needs suffering united to him to save the world. Jesus called me a warrior of light to conquer the evil and darkness of the world." In Manuel's young mind, this was not poetry or metaphor. It was his reality. Every pain, every sacrifice, every prayer was part of a cosmic battle in which he, a fragile child, stood beside Christ as his warrior. And this is what made his joy so magnetic. People gathered around him not out of pity, but because they were drawn to a mysterious strength that came not from him, but from the grace he received in the sacraments, above all, the Eucharist, his balm of grace. As the years passed, Manuel's illness advanced. His frail body grew weaker, his strength slowly fading, but his spirit only seemed to burn brighter. Those who visited him, whether at home or in the hospital, were astonished by the peace and joy that radiated from him. Priests often came to sit at his bedside, hoping to console him, but instead found themselves being uplifted. Manuel would greet them with words of love and encouragement. "I love you. I pray for you. Take Jesus to children, to those who suffer, to the sick. Take Jesus to everyone you meet." He carried within himself a mission, a calling far beyond his years. He insisted that priests remind the faithful of two things: always receive Jesus in a state of grace, free from serious sin. After communion, spend time in silence, giving thanks, because Jesus is very great, he is God, and he has to be treated like God. These were not theological lectures. They were the heartfelt convictions of a child who lived each Mass, each communion, as though heaven itself had touched him. But even as Manuel's soul soared, his body continued to suffer. The pain often left him trembling, and his mother, together with his priest, would beg him to take medicine to ease the agony. At times he agreed, but often he gently resisted. "I want to wait a little longer before I take medicine," he explained, "because Jesus needs my suffering to save souls." This simple sentence carried the weight of the cross itself. Manuel had come to see his suffering not as meaningless torment, but as a precious offering united with Christ's own passion. In the silence of his hospital bed, he had embraced the mystery that saints spend lifetimes learning, that suffering, when joined with love, becomes redemptive. As his final days drew near, Manuel made preparations with the calmness of someone planning for a journey. He gave his mother precise instructions for the day of his death. He wanted to wear his first communion suit, the same one he had worn the day Jesus entered his heart for the first time. He asked that instead of a pillow beneath his head, his hand would rest on an open Bible. The page he chose was Jeremiah 17:14. "Heal me, Lord, that I may be healed. Save me, that I may be saved, for you are my praise." It was as though Manuel wanted to leave behind a final testimony, that his trust in God's healing and salvation went beyond the body, reaching into eternity. On July 20th, 2009, the moment finally came. Manuel was lying in his bed, his rosary clasped tightly in his hands. A priest celebrated Mass in his room, and Manuel received communion one last time. The mystery of his life had reached its summit. He had longed for the Eucharist since childhood, and now, in his final hour, he was united with Jesus once more. After communion, with the faintest whisper, he said the words of completion, "I have finished." And with that, Manuel Fodra, child of Sicily, warrior of light, lover of the Eucharist, passed into eternity. His story did not end with his death. Those who knew him continued to speak of him as a living witness, a reminder that holiness is not reserved for the old or the strong. Even a child can become a beacon of Christ's love, if only he opens his heart completely. Manuel's short life shines like a flame in the darkness, showing us that the Eucharist is not just a ritual, but an encounter with the living God. Through his suffering, his joy, and his unwavering devotion, he revealed that even the smallest soul can echo the greatness of heaven. The story of Manuel Fodra is not simply the story of a sick child. It is the story of a soul who, in only 8 short years on earth, lived with a faith so deep, so pure, that it continues to echo far beyond the streets of his small Sicilian village. When we look at his life, what do we see? On the surface, It is marked by tragedy, a cancer diagnosis at age 4, endless treatments, and a death that came far too soon. But if we look closer, through the eyes of faith, we see something else. A child transformed by grace, who turned his suffering into a song of love. From his devotion to the Rosary, to his longing for the Eucharist, to his tender conversations with Jesus in his heart, Manuel reminds us that the Christian life is not about length of years, but about depth of love. He called the Eucharist the balm of grace. To adults, that phrase may sound strange, almost playful. But in his childlike simplicity, Manuel had grasped a truth that many of us forget, that the Eucharist is powerful beyond measure. It is the living presence of Jesus able to strengthen, to heal, to transform, to ignite the soul with light, even in the darkest of nights. And Manuel's words still challenge us today. He urged the faithful never to approach communion casually, but to prepare their hearts, to remain in a state of grace, and to give thanks afterward in silence. He knew, even at 6 years old, that Jesus deserves not a hurried gesture, but the reverence of love and attention. How many times do we rush out of Mass, forgetting who we have just received? How often do we neglect to listen, in silence, for the voice of Christ who wants to speak to our hearts? Manuel's message is simple, but urgent. Stop, be still, and let Jesus speak. He also gave us another mission, to be warriors of light in the midst of darkness. These were not empty words for him. He lived them through pain, through joy, through every sacrifice he offered. And now, his invitation is passed on to us. In a world often marked by confusion, sin, and despair, we too are called to carry Christ's light into every corner of our lives. Even in his final moments, Manuel thought not of himself, but of others. He prayed for priests, for children, for the sick, for all who suffered. He believed his pain could help save souls because he united it with Christ's sacrifice on the cross. That is a mystery the world cannot understand, but the saints do. And Manuel, though just a boy, joined their company by living it to the very end. On July 20th, 2009, he whispered, "I have finished." But in truth, his mission was not finished. It was only beginning. Today, his life stands as a testimony that holiness is possible for everyone. You do not need to be famous, powerful, or wealthy. You do not even need to live a long life. You simply need to say yes to Jesus completely, wholeheartedly, like Manuel did. And so we are left with his legacy. A child who showed us how to love Mary with trust, how to love the Eucharist with reverence, and how to love Christ with all our hearts, even in suffering. Perhaps the greatest lesson Manuel gives us is this: that nothing, not even illness or death, can defeat the soul who lives in Jesus. His short life was a candle, burning brightly against the night. And though that candle was extinguished on earth, its light continues to shine for all who hear his story. Manuel once said, "Jesus called me a warrior of light to conquer the evil and darkness of the world." May we too accept that call. May we, like him, be warriors of light, living witnesses of Christ's joy in a world that so desperately needs it. And as we remember his final words, whispered with faith after receiving his last communion, "I have finished," may we be reminded that the finish line of this life is not the end, but the doorway into eternal life. Manuel Fodra, pray for us.